Hello, my name is Slusher, and I'm going to be doing a video rebuttal to a video that was recommended to me by YouTube earlier today by Wilfred Wong, in which he, by fan demand, reviewed the character Spider-Man in Marvel Heroes 2016. So why am I making this video? By fan request, Wilfred decided to do a review of Spider-Man, but he decided to review the ranged version of Spider-Man. I want to clarify that if that's how you want to play Spider-Man, that's totally your right, and I don't want to take away from people's self-expression of how they want to play their characters. And maybe in his mind, the ranged version of Spider-Man is not that good, and therefore Spider-Man is not that good. But for me personally, Spider-Man is a melee character. What I mean by that is, watching the TV show and reading the comics growing up, for me, Spider-Man is a melee character with ranged options. He has webs and stuff, but he uses those mostly to augment his ability to lay a beat down with his fists. Spider-Man, as a main thing, is a melee character to me, and for that reason, I like to play him as melee. I also do prefer just playing melee characters in games, much like it seems like Wilfred perhaps prefers just playing ranged characters in games. So I can understand that too. There's maybe a situation. Winter Soldier is a good example. Winter Soldier is totally, in the comics or movies, a ranged character and a melee character both. There is definitely a reason why you could play either one. But, surprise, I play him as melee because that's just the way I like to play these types of games. So I can understand where he would play him as ranged. But at the same time, I feel like only reviewing the ranged version of Spider-Man does a huge disservice to how cool this character is in this game. I actually think Spider-Man is a really well-made character in Marvel Heroes, and for that reason, I didn't want to leave the melee players out there with a bad taste in their mouth from watching his video. Not calling it a bad video, but saying, if you enjoy melee, you might watch that video and think Spider-Man's not for you, and I think that's just not true. So I wanted to show off melee Spider-Man for everyone. Now, the one thing I will refute about Wilfred's video is he did mention several times that he liked the older version of Melee Spider-Man better, but he no longer can stand it, and therefore that's part of the reason why he switched to ranged. And I just wanted to actually be pretty hard on this topic. I mean to say, I'm going to go out and even say that I don't think that's a defensible stance. So we're going to go over the history of Spider-Man since the beta. In the beta, Spider-Man was one of the most popular characters. I mean, besides the fact that he was Spider-Man, which he's Spider-Man, he was very popular because he was one of the most powerful characters in the game. The reason for this was because in the beta, dodge was broken. You could easily stack dodge to be over 90% dodge rating, and Spider-Man was one of the best characters at stacking dodge because his talent tree helped you do it. So, literally, and as Spider-Man, you would go into the hardest encounters in the game. You would stand right up next to the boss and go to town and almost never take damage. In fact, at this time, it was kind of funny because you would stack all dodge on him and no health. If you did actually get that unlucky 1% hit, you oftentimes would die. So it was kind of like a funny, jokey, oh, you got outplayed thing when you would die on Spider-Man back then, because really it was just you got the unlucky 1% RNG roll, but, truthfully, you didn't do anything because playing Spider-Man skilled was to just stand on their face and tank everything because you would dodge pretty much everything. So what was the rotation like at that time? At that time, you had 2 or 3 abilities depending on how you want to look at it. You had your ultimate, which was a 10-minute cooldown, so I'm not going to discuss that. And then you had the 2 other abilities. You had the web spray, which he still has to this day. You still use to this day in the melee build. And you've used, actually, the 2 powers I'm going to discuss next, you've used in every variation of Melee Spider-Man. So, the first ability is the web spray, which is a ground dot that also applies a debuff that causes enemies to take 10% increased damage from all of Spider-Man's other damaging abilities. The other move you would use was his what's called a Spirit Spender in this game, or filler, and that would be, you would use what you still use today, Spider Brawl. I just want to point out that at this time, Spider Brawl had one animation. he had like a lunging uppercut that he would do, much like in the picture down here. I know it's kind of hard to see, but that was literally the one animation for this. Every single melee attack was this same lunging uppercut that he would repeat over and over again, and it actually sort of didn't have recovery frames. And I don't mean that in the sense of gameplay wise. I mean that in the sense of the way it looked. He would almost teleport back to the original location so that he could start it again, because it was such a long, like lanky lunging punch animation that it wasn't a good animation. And because it had no variety whatsoever, it was very stark. So that version of Spider-Man, I'm going to go ahead and say, well, maybe possibly the most powerful version of Spider-Man. Definitely the worst version of Spider-Man. Not fun to play. And that is evident by the fact that when dodge did eventually get nerfed and we went into the dark ages of defensive stats in Marvel Heroes, after the dodge nerf, for all characters, not just for Spider-Man, any defensive stats basically became, you would only get them because they came on an item that had good offensive stats. Otherwise, you would never take any defensive stats whatsoever. I would still say gearing to this day leans a little on the offensive side, but if you get something like the legendary Perseus shield, for instance, that has a lot of defensive stats on it, you will definitely notice an increase in tankiness that you never would have noticed during the dark ages of the defensive stats, other than obviously the invulnerability proc on that item, but that's not that important for this discussion. So what happened then was the game came out and Marvel Heroes started to release new characters. At this time, they realized that most of the beta characters were kind of lame. So they came out with a program called the 52 Review Program. And what the 52 Review Program mainly was centered around was the idea that ultimates are really cool, but with a 10-minute cooldown, it's very punishing. So they wanted to add a way for characters to feel really cool and powerful, but that doesn't feel punishing in the sense that I have to save this for just the right moment. You know, like, oh, I'm clearing trash. Here comes my big move. Oh, wait. Now I'm not going to have my really awesome, empowering move for the boss. So they added what was called signature powers, which is, in my mind, sort of like a mini ultimate. It's an ability that's meant to really, like, showcase the character in a cool way, but also have a cooldown where you can use it maybe like every other fight. So you can use it, just let it rip. Don't worry about it. Don't feel bad about, oh, maybe I should have saved this for this. And then, but also have it be very powerful and very cool. And these were called signature powers. Now, Spider-Man's is called Amazing Smash. It was introduced in his 52 review. It hasn't changed other than damage numbers, obviously, at all. So it has two things. First of all, he jumps up and swings around like that, and it does a very good amount of damage. The second part of it that you can't see here in the danger room is that it has a vacuum ability where it sucks everyone into the point of impact. Very awesome part of the ability. In my opinion, the more powerful piece of the ability. The damage is very high for a normal, but don't underrate the vacuum. It's awesome. You can do really cool things like suck everyone into an area and then follow it up with your AoE moves right on top of where you just sucked everyone into, leading to really high combinations of AoE damage that you couldn't do if it not for the vacuum power. So really cool ability. So at that time, after his 52 review, Spider-Man now had 4 moves, aside from the ultimate. He would web the ground. You would now start using this move, which is called Leaping Assault, and then you would use the signature and you would use the Spirit Spender, which still had the bad animation. So the other thing I want to mention about his signature was this. So nowadays, Spider-Man's Amazing Smash refunds his webbing, which is what his mana is now called, all the way. This has always been the case. And back at this time when his 52 review was done, mana items, the Omega system was fairly new, so having a lot of Omegas that would enable you to waste mana were not as common as they are nowadays. What's now called the Infinity system. Also, the items at that time, mainly the artifacts that restored mana, were the most sought after and expensive items in the game. So it was very hard to come by them. And what this means is, what I'm getting at is, for an average player at that time, using your signature on cooldown for the damage, as awesome as it was was not necessarily the best idea. For an average or casual player, whatever word you want to use, it was pretty much a requirement to save your signature to restore mana or for bosses only. However, again, I want to be clear, it was possible with the very best gear in the game at the time and high Omega points for the time to use it on cooldown. And this was basically the goal for a Spider-Man player, was to get to that gear level where you could just use your signature, just let it rip on cooldown for the awesome damage that it did, because it did very high damage, especially for at that time. So that was how Spider-Man played for about a year and a half. And then it kind of came to, because he was one of the 52 reviews were finished, and the first couple characters they did 52 reviews for started to pale in comparison again, much like the beta characters in the first story, compared to the newer characters and compared to the later 52 reviews. So they went back and they said, well, Spider-Man's a really popular character. We can't just leave him like this, so let's give him a little bit of love. And they did what was called at the time a quality of life update. So besides adding 2 new moves, they also gave him a conversion where he converted dodge rating into damage. So because we were still in the dark ages of defensive stats, this was a really cool thing to do. It made it so that a stat that generally didn't matter did matter for Spider-Man. So it allowed you to take some items that maybe weren't so good and put them on Spider-Man, and they were pretty good. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. For the most part, the same items that were good on everyone were good on Spider-Man over and above dodge items. But for some players, if it wasn't your main character and you didn't want to waste a grill necklace on him, or you didn't have a ton of gems of the curse sitting around, a hybrid defensive offensive item that had some dodge on it was way better on Spider-Man than it was on anyone else. So it was kind of a cool little thing they gave him in his quality of life update. The other thing they did in his quality of life update was they finally replaced the animation of his spirit spender to what it is today. As you can see, there's like either 4 or 5 different animations in there. Huge improvement from one animation. It probably sounds like I'm exaggerating, because it would sound so silly to see a character do the exact same punch animation that fast, but that's what it used to be. So in the quality of life update, they added the animation. They added 2 new abilities. One was a flipping kick, which is no longer in the game. It's most similar to this ability, which is what kind of has replaced it now in the biggest update ever. And then they gave him Arachnid Assault, which is this ability, which is a very cool ability, even more so now after the greatest update ever than before. This ability is very cool because it has a very short cooldown, a 6-second cooldown, and when you use it, you are actually not here. You are invulnerable to both single target and AoE abilities. This is very awesome now in the biggest update ever, where previously, through med packs, every character in the game had access to cooldown and vulnerability. Now, having access to cooldown and vulnerability is something exclusive to only some of the characters in the game. And not only that, Spider-Man is on a 6-second cooldown, which is very awesome. Things like dodging Searcher's one-shot mechanic and not having to go behind a rock. This is something that not every character can do anymore, but Spider-Man can do. Very cool. So I'm a big fan of that ability, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, but I just want to get back to his quality of life update. So at this time, his rotation became, you would lay down the dot with the vulnerability buff, you would slam, you would do the flip kick, which is no longer in the game, you would Arachnid Assault, and then you would use the signature, and of course you would use this when everything was on cooldown. At this time, the game had advanced a long way in terms of items. Spirit regenerating items were no longer very highly sought after. They actually were some of the cheapest artifacts in the game, as well as the fact that the Omega system had been out for a long time, so having enough Omega points to reduce your spirit quite a lot were available, and it kind of got to the point, and costume cores that had mana regeneration were also very plentiful. So basically, it got to the point where right around this time, probably a little before it even, so not really related to the review, but we'll just talk about it now as a point break to talk about, using signature on cooldown was a viable option for even casual players at this point. So you would generally use those abilities, use your signature on cooldown, and that's how you would play the character. This is when I think, after this update, I think Spider-Man is a very cool character. I don't think there's any argument for him being a bad character after this point. So that's where I kind of disagree with Wilfred. If he's saying that this is the old melee version that he likes, I don't really understand that, because the only thing that has changed is he did lose his flipping kick, but he gained this move, which is kind of similar. It is a little slower, because you could kind of use a flipping kick in place of a roll, but you can use this to get movement across the room, which I like, and is very useful in the biggest update ever. With the cooldown on dashes, this move does not count against it, so it does sort of give you an extra dash, and has way more distance than the flip kick had. So while the flip kick was faster, you could not use it to close distance nearly as well as this ability. The other thing he did gain was this new rock throw. It works on an ammo system. You get 1 ammo every 8 seconds, so you can throw 2 at once if you have both charges, but it does take a full 16 seconds to get 2 charges again. So I'm going to go over the optimal damage combo, but then I'm going to talk about why you probably won't see me use it when I run the terminal. So the optimal damage combo in the greatest update ever version of Spider-Man is to, once again, lay the dot. You've seen this before. Then you do the slam that you've always done. You throw 2 rocks. You do the replacement of the flip kick, and then you do a racked assault. And obviously you weave in the signature when you can. In my opinion, with the changes to his mana to the webbing, it is important to get some mana back now. So my recommendation is, if you want to use the signature in your opening burst combo, that's fine. But moving forward, you do want to try to get some mana from it, because you will run out of mana if you don't have... I should be more clear. In my Infinity system, I only have 891 points. Maybe if you have 1,000, it's different, but at 899 and 91 points, with Spirit Reduction maxed out as far as I can with this many points, I still feel like it's possible to run out of webbing if you aren't somewhat thoughtful about your signature, but it is pretty good. You don't have to super worry about it. So, when I get to the terminal, the things that I want to talk about is, I will be using the original combo on cooldown for damage as well as the rocks, but I'm going to be using the new flip kick for movement ability to dodge stuff, and I'm also going to be using the racked assault as a defensive tool. I'll also be using the signature sometimes for mana, but mostly as a combo to vacuum everything in, to eat my other AoE spells, sort of clean up an area, since with the changes, clearing trash has become a very important aspect of doing terminals. So I just want to go over my gear real quickly before we go in there, so you have an idea of what my damage looks like compared to what your damage might look like, depending on what kind of gear you have. So this is what I have. As you can see, it's a little outdated. I have not updated my gear because I've not been playing Spider-Man as a main since the biggest update ever came out. So you will see that I'm using some outdated things. I do have Blessed Lizard Formula, White Gorilla Necklace, Skull Medallion, Gem of the Cursed, and Spider Clone Serum as my artifacts. My Uru Forge is Power Dupe. I'm using Relic of Asgard, which is melee damage. Now, I want to point out again, I do not consider Spider-Man one of my mains at this time. So this is a really good relic for a character who uses mostly melee abilities, but is not a main. The crit damage relic definitely outperforms this, but this is a good substitute if you don't want to use your best possible relics on the character. I'm using a level 80 axe. I'm using a near max roll Midtown Signet. I believe the Xavier School ring is recommended here, the ranged melee version. But this is a really good substitute for that, again, if it's not a main character of yours, because you will be using some ranged abilities, like the dot is considered a ranged ability, so you will be proccing the ring without going out of your way to do so. And then, of course, I'm just using Spider-Man's uniques, where there are definitely some any hero uniques that are superior to these. I'm using the costume core that I was using before the greatest update ever, so it does not have the new extra affix that the new ones have that you can get after the update. But I do have full crit damage rolls, and it does have the webbing restore as well as the damage shield. And that's it. I do have a variety of costumes just in case you wanted to get a look at them. I'm using Superior Spider-Man, which I think is really cool because it adds the extra arms on some of your abilities, but also, there are the Spider-Gwen costume, which are very popular. The Spider-Girl costume, which is really popular. And then, in case you haven't had Spider-Man yet, this is the costume that he comes with, which was recently redone. And I really like it now that it's been redone. It looks really cool. It's got kind of like a cel-shaded look to it. which I think is really cool. So that's awesome. And I don't own it, but the symbiote costume, or the Back in Black costume as it's called, not actually the symbiote costume. There's some licensing reasons on that one, but the Black in Black costume is essentially the symbiote costume. Is reworked on the PB, and I believe it's coming out tomorrow. I don't own that costume, but if you like the symbiote look, something that's been remade recently with a similar art style to this, but Venom style, is coming out. So I would check that out if I were you, and I'm a big fan of the black Spider-Man costumes, but I don't personally have that costume. So we're going to go back to the enhanced, because that's what I wanted to use, and we'll head on into the terminal. And we'll do curse. Alright, so I'm going to be playing this a little bit on the safe side, because I do have not a ton of health. So, after the greatest update ever, you used to be able to pull like this whole bridge at once, and then just clean everything up, but it's a little bit important to be a little bit on the safe side nowadays, which is fine. So I'll use that for the gathering everything together.
Back to Midgard with you.
Alright, I'm gonna pick that up real quick just because it's gonna be an off-screen indicator otherwise. Alright, we'll get these guys together. I forgot to call my... One moment. I forgot to use my team up. Alright, let's go. Alright, so again, I'm going to use my signature for the vacuum. Check the map. Alright, so we have the harder formation, but that's fine. So that is one thing that's changed in the greatest update ever, is it is kind of important to clear trash. If you train everything, you'll probably end up killing yourself eventually, so it did slow down the terminals a little bit, but I think that's fine. It makes them a little more interactive. And as you can see, the mini-bosses also have a lot more HP than they used to have. Or, well, relative to the damage. The damage... Dodge that. Alright, we're gonna use the signature to gather. I'm gonna gather everyone together over here.
Do not call me Warden, except that I am only Archangel now.
Just trying to clean it up a little bit here. You'll see that when I take a big hit, a lot of times that's when I'll use Arachnid Assault to try and give myself a little reprieve and get some health back.
They were mad.
Alright, let's head over here. I'm really afraid of those guys training, but hopefully it's not a big deal. Signature these guys. Oh, I did die there. Luckily I have a res ability. Alright, now we're back in action. So as you can see, if you get a lot of guys at once in the greatest update ever, it is actually dangerous, unlike previously, where it really just didn't matter at all. You probably will notice too if you're watching that I forgot to use the rock throw a lot. His other new ability I don't forget to use because it sort of replaced the old flip ability, but because the rock throw is totally new, I do miss my opportunities to get it a lot.
We will usher in true utopia.
Alright, let's do it. I'm gonna use my ultimate here, which looks like this. It's called it's supposed to sort of imitate the Maximum Spider from the arcade game, if you remember it. Pretty cool stuff.
Make them fear us.
Or, I'm sorry for Marvel vs. Capcom, but I'm sure you know what I meant. And very quick kill.
That was quite enjoyable.
Alright, so that's my ability on Melee Spider-Man. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any comments that you want to leave this on the video, just let me know what you liked or didn't like about the video. If you have any requests for me to review other characters, I'd be down to do it if I'm good at the character. Just let me know, and I'll let you. I'll try to do it. We'll see. I also have some topics that I wouldn't mind talking about, like I think there's some discussion to be had about the slowing down of the game. Has it been slowed down? How badly has it been slowed down? For me personally, I feel like it's added a lot to the game. Like the terminal that I just did, yes, it did take longer to do than it did previously, but it added a lot of gameplay for me to do it. Maybe you feel differently. You can talk about that in the comments. But yeah, I hope you guys liked the video. Just leave any comments that you want about whether it was good or whether it was bad. And if you have any requests for the future, otherwise, my name is Slusher. I hope you like this, and I hope that it changed your mind. If you're someone who likes Melee characters, likes Spider-Man, and thought from Wilfred's video that maybe Spider-Man wasn't for you, maybe now you can see that Spider-Man is for you. And I hope that's the case for at least one person. Thanks for watching.